The words cut through the air like a knife, sharp and deliberate. Come on. She's just a janitor, let her play. It'll be a laugh. Ethan Caldwell's voice boomed across the sleek, glass-walled executive suite on the 45th floor of Apex Innovations' Atlanta headquarters. Crystal chandeliers glinted above, casting fractured light over mahogany tables and tailored suits. The room erupted in chuckles, executives, VPs, and board members clinking their bourbon glasses, their amusement as polished as the marble floors. Someone from marketing snorted. A director leaned back, smirking, his Rolex catching the light. They thought they were in on the joke, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. Lena Carter stood by a cleaning cart, her gray uniform faded, her name tag barely legible. She was a shadow in their world, 5'2", black, her hands still smelling faintly of bleach from scrubbing conference rooms at 3 a.m. Her eyes, though, were steady as stone, unyielding, like she'd seen storms these people couldn't imagine. Nobody in that room knew Lena had once been called the Queen's Shadow in Vine City's chess circuits, a 14-year-old prodigy who dismantled grown men in park games under flickering streetlights. They didn't know about the scholarships she lost when her mom's cancer bills piled up, or how she boxed away her chess set to raise her kid brother Jamal. To them, she was just the help. Invisible. Disposable. A punchline. Ethan gestured to the chessboard at the room's center, its ivory pieces gleaming like trophies. Step up, Lena. We've got a seat for our guest of honor. His grin was all teeth, the kind of charm that closed million-dollar deals. The crowd leaned in, hungry for a spectacle. Lena didn't flinch. She pushed her cart aside, the wheels squeaking faintly, and walked to the board. Every step was deliberate, like a general crossing a battlefield. She sat, her gaze locking onto the board with a quiet intensity that made a few suits shift in their seats. "I'll take black," she said, her voice low and shaken. Ethan blinked, caught off guard. "Black. Feeling bold, huh?" She didn't answer. Her fingers moved, resetting the pieces with a precision that wasn't learned in a weekend. The room's laughter faded, replaced by an uneasy hum. This wasn't going to be the joke they expected. Lena wasn't here to entertain. She was here to win. And when she did, the 45th floor would never be the same. The Atlanta skyline glittered like a promise that never quite delivered, its towers stabbing into the humid night air. On the 45th floor of Apex Innovations headquarters, the executive suite pulsed with the kind of energy only money and power could buy. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city's neon veins, Peachtree Street glowing 2 miles below, a river of headlights snaking through the heart of Georgia. Inside, the air smelled of leather, cigar smoke, and ambition. This was the kind of place where deals were sealed with a handshake and a smirk, where the world was carved up over plates of seared scallops and vintage scotch. Apex wasn't just a tech giant. It was a machine, churning out apps, patents, and headlines while its employees scrambled to keep up or got spit out. And tonight, the machine was throwing a party. Lena Carter didn't belong here. Not in their eyes. She was the one they didn't see. The one who slipped through the cracks of their polished lives. 5'2", black, 32 years old, she stood by her cleaning cart like a sentinel, her gray uniform hanging loose on her frame, the name tag pinned to her chest, so faded it might as well have been blank. Her hands, rough from years of bleach and late-night shifts, gripped the cart's handle. To the suits in the room, she was background noise, less than that even. She was the reason their trash cans were empty, their conference tables gleamed, their coffee stains vanished by dawn. But Lena was more than her job, more than the 3 a.m. shadows she worked in. She was a ghost with a past they'd never bothered to unearth. 15 years ago, in the cracked asphalt lots of Vine City, Lena had been a legend. They called her the Queen's Shadow. A skinny kid with braids who'd sit cross-legged on park benches, her cheap plastic chessboard balanced on her knees. Grown men, steelworkers, cab drivers, hustlers would line up to challenge her, their pride crumbling as she trapped their kings in 10 moves. At 14, she'd swept the Atlanta Junior Chess League, her name etched in a grainy photo on the community center's wall. They said she could have gone national, maybe even global. But life doesn't care about Kaveh beans. Her mom's cancer came fast, the kind that ate through savings and hope. Lena's dad was long gone, left when she was 6. By 16, she was working double shifts at a diner to pay for chemo that didn't work. The scholarship to Emory University, the one tied to her chess ranking, slipped away like sand. Her chessboard went into a cardboard box, taped shut, buried under hospital bills and grief. Now, she mopped floors at Apex, her dreams reduced to a faint echo in the back of her mind. But the game never left her. Not really. Late at night, when the city slept, Lena would trace old matches in her head, her fingers twitching as if moving invisible pieces. She lived in a one-bedroom apartment in Vine City. The walls thin enough to hear the neighbor's TV, the air heavy with the scent of fried onions and damp carpet. Her 16-year-old brother, Jamal, slept on a pull-out couch, his algebra books scattered across the coffee table. Jamal was her why, the reason she dragged herself through 12-hour shifts, the reason she didn't break. He was a junior at Booker T, Washington High, quick with a laugh, but sharp with a dream. He wanted to be an engineer, maybe build bridges, maybe get out of Vine City. Lena saw herself in him, the version of her that hadn't been ground down. She'd do anything to keep a spark alive, even if it meant swallowing her own. Across the room, Ethan Caldwell held court like a king. 40, white, 6'1", with the kind of jawline that screamed Ivy League and old money. He'd built Apex from a startup in a Buckhead garage to a billion-dollar empire, his face plastered on Forbes covers and TED Talk stages. Ethan didn't just play chess, he wielded it. Back at Yale, he'd crushed opponents in national tournaments, his Sicilian defense as ruthless as his boardroom tactics. To him, the game was a mirror, strategy, control, dominance. He didn't lose, not in business, not in life. Tonight, his navy suit was tailored to perfection, his cufflinks glinting as he swirled his drink. The crowd hung on his every word, their laughter a currency he collected without effort. Ethan was the sun, and everyone else orbited him. But something about Lena caught his eye. Maybe it was the way she stood, unbothered by the room's noise, her stillness a kind of defiance. Maybe it was boredom, an itch for something new. Whatever it was, he saw an opportunity, not for a game, but for a show. "Let's have some fun," he'd said, his voice carrying that casual cruelty masked as charm. The chessboard was already set up, a prop for the night's entertainment, its ivory pieces worth more than Lena's monthly rent. The crowd parted as he waved her over, their eyes glinting with anticipation. They expected a slaughter, a quick laugh before they moved on to dessert. Lena's pulse didn't quicken. She'd faced worse than their stares, eviction notices, hospital waiting rooms, the weight of a world that didn't care. She pushed her cart to the side, the squeak of its wheels louder than the room's murmurs. Her sneakers, scuffed but clean, crossed the marble floor. She didn't look at Ethan, didn't look at anyone. Her eyes were on the board, the one place where she'd always been free. The crowd's whispers grew sharper. Does she even know the rules? This'll be quick. Ethan sat across from her, his grin wide, predatory. "You sure you're up for this, Lena?" he asked, leaning back like he'd already won. She met his gaze for the first time, her brown eyes unflinching. "I'm sure," she said, her voice low, steady, like a blade sliding from its sheath. The room didn't know it yet, but the game was already hers. And when it was over, Apex Innovations would never look at Lena Carter the same way again. The executive suite on the 45th floor of Apex Innovations' Atlanta headquarters was a cathedral of excess, its chandeliers casting a golden glow over the chessboard at the room's heart. The ivory pieces stood like soldiers, their reflections dancing on the polished mahogany table. Ethan Caldwell leaned back in his leather chair, his navy suit crisp, his grin a blade. Across from him sat Lena Carter, her gray janitor's uniform a stark contrast to the opulence, her hands folded calmly in her lap. The crowd of executives, suits, pearls, and egos formed a loose circle, their bourbon glasses sweating in their hands. They were here for a show, expecting Ethan to crush the help in a few moves, a quick flex of his Yale-honed chess prowess. but the air felt wrong, heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. Ethan opened with confidence, sliding his king's pawn 2 squares forward, the classic e4. His eyes flicked to Lena, expecting hesitation, maybe fear. She didn't blink. "I'll take black," she'd said, her voice a low hum, like a wire pulled taut. She mirrored his move, her fingers brushing the ebony pawn with a familiarity that made a VP in the back frown. The crowd murmured, their laughter still sharp. She knows how to move the pieces, at least. Ethan smirked, launching into a Ruy Lopez opening, his knights and bishops slicing across the board like a general commanding an army. He'd used this strategy to dismantle opponents in college tournaments, charity galas, even a televised match against a minor grandmaster. It was his signature, his sword. Lena responded like water meeting stone, silent, fluid, inevitable. Her moves were deliberate, each piece placed with a precision that felt like memory, not guesswork. No flair, no theatrics, just a quiet rhythm that started to unnerve the room. 5 moves in, Ethan's smirk faltered. His knight was pinned, his center exposed. He adjusted his cufflinks, cleared his throat, and pushed the bishop forward, trying to regain control. Lena didn't hesitate. She slid her queen's pawn 1 square, a subtle shift that locked his position tighter. The crowd's chuckles faded, replaced by uneasy glances. A woman from HR whispered, "Is she good?" Someone else muttered, "It's just luck." 10 moves in, the room was a tomb. Ethan's brow furrowed, his fingers hovering over a rook he didn't dare move. Lena's board was a fortress. Her knights guarded the flanks, her bishops cut diagonals like lasers. She hadn't attacked, not yet, but every move was a trap waiting to spring. Ethan tried a gambit, sacrificing a pawn to open a line. Lena ignored it, advancing a knight to the center, her eyes never leaving the board. The crowd shifted, their glasses forgotten, their breaths shallow. This wasn't a game anymore. It was a reckoning. At move 15, Ethan's king was cornered, his pieces scattered like a broken army. He stared at the board, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the table's edge. Lena leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Check." Her rook slid to the 7th rank, guillotine. Ethan froze, his eyes darting across the board, searching for an escape. There was none. He pushed his king 1 square, a desperate flinch. Lena's queen moved next, calm, final. "Checkmate," she said, her tone flat, like she was reading a grocery list. The word hit the room like a gunshot. Silence swallowed the sweet. Ethan's face was a mask, his lips pressed into a thin line. The crowd didn't move, didn't clap, didn't breathe. Lena stood, smoothing her uniform. "Thank you for the game, Mr. Caldwell," she said, her eyes meeting his for a split second, long enough to see the shock, the fracture in his armor. She turned, grabbed her cleaning cart, and pushed it toward the service elevator, the squeak of its wheels the only sound in the room. The doors closed behind her, and the 45th floor felt smaller, like the walls had inched closer. Then chaos. A junior analyst, barely 25, pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling as he uploaded shaky video of the match to X. The hashtag #MadeBeatsio was born before Lena reached the ground floor. By midnight, the clip had 10,000 views, the comments a wildfire. "No way she's just a janitor. This is staged, right? Who is she?" Ethan didn't touch his bourbon, didn't join the nervous laughter that sputtered to life around him. He sat, staring at the board, the black queen still standing where Lena had left it. His defeat wasn't just a game. It was a mirror, reflecting something he couldn't name. Lena didn't know about the video, not yet. She clocked out at 4 a.m., her sneakers silent on the lobby's marble tiles. Outside, Atlanta streets were quiet, the air thick with summer heat. She walked the 2 miles to Vine City, her apartment key jangling in her pocket. Inside, Jamal slept on the couch, his chess app glowing on his phone. A half-finished game paused. Lena paused, watching him, her chest tight. She played tonight not for pride, not for Ethan, but for the girl she used to be, the one who believed a chessboard could change the world. Now, the world was watching, and she didn't know if she was ready. But something had shifted. The video spread like a virus, hitting 50,000 views by dawn. At apex, whispers turned to stares. A janitor had humiliated the CEO, and the internet wouldn't let it go. Ethan's assistant found him still in the suite at 6 a.m., the chessboard untouched. "Sir, you okay?" she asked, her voice cautious. He didn't answer. He was replaying Lena's moves in his head, each one a cut deeper than the last. She hadn't just won. She'd exposed him, his arrogance, his blindness. And for the first time in years, Ethan Caldwell felt small. The morning sun barely cracked through the haze over Vine City, its light weak against the peeling paint and sagging porches of Lena Carter's neighborhood. Her one-bedroom apartment smelled of instant coffee and the faint mildew that clung to the walls. She sat at a wobbly kitchen table, her gray janitor's uniform folded beside her, her eyes fixed on a chipped mug. Jamal, her 16-year-old brother, shuffled in, his backpack slung over one shoulder. "You see this?" he asked, holding up his phone. The screen glowed with the X video. #MadeBeatCO, now at 200,000 views. Lena's stomach twisted. She hadn't played for fame. She played to survive. But now, the world was watching, and it felt like a trap. At Apex Innovations, the 45th floor was a different kind of battlefield. The executive suite, once a stage for Ethan Caldwell's triumph, now buzzed with whispers that stung like hornets. Lena pushed her cleaning cart through the glass-walled corridors, her sneakers silent on the marble. Eyes followed her, secretaries glancing up from their monitors, analysts pausing mid-conversation. Some smirked, others stared, but none spoke to her. In the break room, she found a note taped to her locker, the words scrawled in black marker, "Know your place." She ripped it down, her jaw tight, but the words burned. She'd spent years being invisible. Now she was a target. The video was everywhere, X, TikTok, even local news blogs. Comments poured in, a mix of awe and venom. "She's a chess genius. Total PR stunt. No way a janitor plays like that." Lena avoided her phone, but Jamal wouldn't let it go. "You're famous, Lena," he said, his eyes bright as they walked to his bus stop, the Atlanta heat already sticky at 7 a.m. She forced a smile. "Famous gets you nothing but trouble," she said, ruffling his hair. But trouble was already here. At work, a supervisor called her in. Her tone clipped. "Keep your head down, Carter. This company doesn't need drama." Lena nodded, but inside, she seethed. She played one game, and now she was the problem. Ethan Caldwell wasn't sleeping. His Buckhead penthouse, a sterile fortress of glass and steel, felt like a cage. He sat at his kitchen island, the city's skyline a cold glow beyond the windows. His laptop was open. The video paused on Lena's final move, her queen pinning his king like a hunter's arrow. He'd watched it a dozen times, each replay a cut deeper. She wasn't just good. She was surgical. Her strategy a language he couldn't speak. Who was she? He typed her name into a search bar, Lena Carter. Nothing. No LinkedIn, no chess profiles, just noise. But Ethan wasn't a man who accepted nothing. He dug deeper, pulling up old archives from the Atlanta Junior Chess League. A 2008 article caught his eye. Queen's Shadow Sweeps Vine City Invitational. The grainy photo showed a teenage girl, braids tucked behind her ears, her gaze fierce over a chessboard. It was her. He didn't tell anyone, not his assistant, not the board. Instead, he took the service elevator to the basement at Apex, where the air smelled of bleach and damp concrete. Lena was there, sorting trash bags, her movements mechanical. "You were a prodigy," he said, his voice echoing off the cinder block walls. She didn't look up. That was a long time ago. He stepped closer, his loafers out of place on the gritty floor. "Why'd you stop?" Lena's hand stilled. "Hospitals don't pay themselves, Mr. Caldwell. Neither do little brothers." Her voice was steel, but her eyes flickered with something raw, grief, maybe, or defiance. Ethan didn't back off. "Play me again," he said. "No crowd, no cameras. Just us." Lena laughed, short and bitter. "I'm not your entertainment." But he pressed, his voice quieter now. I'm not asking for a show. I'm asking to learn. She studied him, her gaze peeling back his polish. He wasn't lying, not entirely. Against her better judgment, she agreed, but not at Apex. There's a diner on Auburn Avenue, she said. 4:30 a.m. before my shift. Bring your own board. The diner was a relic, red vinyl booths, fluorescent lights buzzing, the smell of burnt coffee and bacon grease. They met at a corner table, a scratched plastic chessboard between them. Ethan played white, opening with a cautious Italian game. Lena countered with a Sicilian defense, her moves sharp, unyielding. She didn't talk, didn't smile, just played. Ethan lost in 22 moves, his king trapped in a net of her pawns. Again, he said, resetting the board. She raised an eyebrow, but obliged. They played 3 games before the sun rose, each one a lesson in humility for Ethan. She was a wall he couldn't climb, a mind he couldn't outmaneuver. Between moves, she let slip pieces of her past. My dad taught me chess in Freedom Park, she said, her voice distant. He'd play with the old guys after his factory shift. I watched until I was better than them. Ethan listened, his usual swagger gone. Why not go back, he asked. She looked at him like he'd missed the point. Bills don't care about pawns, Mr. Caldwell. Dreams don't feed a kid. He didn't push further, but something shifted. He wasn't chasing a win anymore. He was chasing her truth. The meetings became a ritual, 4:30 a.m. 5 days a week, the diner their battlefield. But the world outside wasn't kind. At Apex, the whispers grew teeth. A senior VP cornered Ethan in the boardroom, his tone oily. You're spending a lot of time with the janitor. People are talking. Ethan's jaw tightened. Let them. But the talk spread, and Lena felt it. Elevators went quiet when she stepped in. A co-worker accidentally spilled coffee on her cart. Then a shock. Ethan overheard a marketing exec bragging about leaking their diner sessions to a blog. By noon, a post went viral. CEO mentors janitor, charity or chess PR? The comments were brutal. She's his pet project. Apex is milking this for clout. Lena saw the post on Jamal's phone that night, her heart sinking. She'd played to prove something to herself, not to be a headline. Now, she was a pawn in someone else's game. She looked at Jamal, his eyes wide with worry. You okay, Lena? He asked. She nodded, but her hand shook. The diner games were over. Ethan had to know that. But deep down, she wasn't sure she could walk away. Not from the board, not from the fight. And that scared her more than the whispers ever could. The Atlanta dawn was a bruise, purple and heavy, smearing across the skyline as Lena Carter walked the cracked sidewalks of Vine City. Her sneakers scuffed the pavement, her breath visible in the early June chill. The viral blog post, CEO mentors janitor, charity or chess PR, had metastasized, its comments a venomous swarm. She's a fraud. Apex staged it for woke points. Lena's phone buzzed with notifications she refused to open. She played one game to reclaim a piece of herself, and now she was a prop in a corporate circus. Her apartment, a cramped refuge of peeling wallpaper and thrift store furniture, offered no escape. Jamal, her 16-year-old brother, sat on the couch, his eyes glued to his phone. They're saying you cheated, Lena, he said, his voice small. She didn't answer, just poured coffee into a chipped mug, her hand steady but her chest tight. At Apex Innovations, the air was poison. The 45th floor, once a shrine to power, now felt like a courtroom. Lena pushed her cleaning cart through the glass corridors, the marble floors reflecting her silhouette like a ghost. Co-workers didn't whisper anymore. They stared, their gazes sharp as broken glass. In the janitor's break room, someone had taped a printed screenshot of the blog post to her locker, the headline circled in red. Is Lena Carter Apex's puppet? She tore it down, her jaw clenched, but the words burrowed deep. She'd spent years blending into the shadows, and now the spotlight was a cage. Ethan Caldwell wasn't faring better. His buckhead penthouse, with its minimalist decor and floor-to-ceiling windows, felt like a prison of his own making. He paced the hardwood floors, his phone lighting up with alerts from PR. The board was livid, demanding a response to the janitor narrative. A senior VP had texted him at 2 a.m. "Fix this, Ethan, or it's your head." He hadn't slept, hadn't eaten. The chessboard in his study sat untouched, Lena's last move. A night fork burned into his memory. He'd underestimated her, not just on the board, but in every way. Now, the world was tearing her apart, and he was the spark. Monday morning, Lena was called to HR. The office was sterile, white walls, a fake plant, a woman in a beige blazer who smiled like a shark. "We need to clarify some things, Miss Carter," she said, her pen tapping a clipboard. "Did Mr. Caldwell pay you to win that game?" Lena's eyes narrowed. "I played because he asked. I won because I'm better." The woman's smile tightened. "You understand how this looks. A janitor beating the CEO? People think it's orchestrated." Lena leaned forward, her voice low, lethal. "People think what you let them think. I'm not your story." She stood, the chair scraping the floor, and walked out, her heart pounding but her head high. That night, she made a decision. She typed a resignation letter on her ancient laptop, the keys sticking with every word. Effective immediately, "I resign from Apex Innovations. I'm not your pawn." She printed it, folded it, and tucked it into her uniform pocket. The Dyna games, the chess, the fleeting moments where she felt alive again, they were over. She wouldn't let Apex turn her into a headline. But as she sealed the envelope, Jamal knocked on her bedroom door. "I saw you play on that video," he said, his voice shaky. "You looked happy. Don't quit, Lena. Not yet." She looked at him, his eyes wide with the kind of hope she'd lost years ago, and something cracked inside her. Ethan found her the next day in the basement, the air thick with the smell of bleach and rust. She was sorting recyclables, her movements robotic. "I saw the HR report," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard. "I'm sorry." Lena didn't look up. "Sorry doesn't fix this, Mr. Caldwell. Your world's chewing me up." He stepped closer, his loafers scuffing the concrete. "Then let's change the world. Play in the Atlanta Chess Classic. Not for me, not for Apex, for you." Lena laughed, sharp and hollow. "You think a tournament fixes this? I'm a janitor, not a fairy tale." But Ethan didn't back down. "I looked up the Queen's shadow. You were a force. You still are. Show them." She turned, her eyes blazing. "Show who? The people calling me a fraud? The ones who think I'm your charity case?" Ethan held her gaze, unflinching. "Show your brother. Show the kids in Vine City who need to see someone like you win." Lena froze. Jamal's face flashed in her mind. His chess app, his dreams of bridges, his belief in her. She wanted to say no, to walk away. But the board called to her, a siren she couldn't ignore. Then a shock. That evening, Lena found Jamal at Freedom Park, hunched over a concrete chess table with a group of teens. He was playing a street match, his moves sloppy, his face tight with frustration. He'd lost badly. "I wanted to be like you," he said, kicking a pebble. "But I suck." Lena knelt beside him, her voice steady. "You don't suck. You just need a teacher." She paused, the weight of her choice settling. "If I play, I'm not doing it for Apex. I'm doing it for you. For us." Jamal's eyes lit up, and for the first time in days, Lena felt the spark of the Queen's shadow flicker back to life. She met Ethan at the diner the next morning, the air thick with grease and dawn. "I'll play," she said, sliding into the booth. "But no sponsors, no PR. Just me, Lena Carter, on the board. And if I win, you stay out my story." Ethan nodded, a faint smile breaking through. "Deal. But you're gonna need to train. And I'm not letting you go easy on me." She raised an eyebrow, setting up the board. "I never did." The decision was made, but the world wasn't done with her. As she left the diner, her phone buzzed, a new ex-post, this time with a blurry photo of her and Ethan at the diner. The caption read, "Apex's CEO and his pet janitor. What's the real game?" Lena's blood ran cold. The scandal wasn't over. It was just beginning. The Marriott Ballroom in downtown Atlanta buzzed like a hive, its fluorescent lights harsh against the faded gold wallpaper. Rows of folding tables stretched across the 10,000 square foot space, each topped with regulation chessboards, plastic clocks, and score sheets curling at the edges. The air smelled of stale coffee and nervous sweat. The Atlanta Chess Classic, Georgia's biggest tournament, drew a motley crowd. Grandmasters in crisp suits, teenage prodigies hunched over tablets, middle-aged hobbyists adjusting their glasses. Lena Carter stood at the entrance, her navy blouse tucked into thrift store slacks, her scuffed sneakers polished to a dull shine. Her player badge hung from a lanyard, her name printed in bold. Lena Carter, unaffiliated. She clutched it like a lifeline, her heart pounding but her face a mask of calm. The world had tried to break her, gossip, scandal, Apex's venom. But here on the board, she was free. Ethan Caldwell slipped in quietly, a gray hoodie and jeans replacing his usual tailored suits. He was just another competitor, his badge reading E. Caldwell, Atlanta. He caught Lena's eye across the room and nodded once, sharp, like a soldier acknowledging a general. She nodded back, then turned away. This wasn't about him. It was about Jamal, watching from the bleachers, with the cheap ticket he'd begged her to buy. It was about the kids in Vine City, who needed to see someone like them rise. It was about the Queen's shadow, clawing her way back from the dark. Her first match was against a cocky college kid from Georgia Tech, his smirk wide as he offered a patronizing handshake. "Good luck, lady," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. Lena crushed him in 27 moves, her Sicilian defense a blade that carved his position apart. The kid's face fell, his handshake limp as he slunk away. The second round was tougher, a wiry woman from Savannah, her attacks fast and reckless. Lena slowed the tempo, baited her into overextending, and snapped the trap shut in 30 moves. The crowd began to whisper, their eyes lingering on the janitor who played like a ghost. Between rounds, the gossip swirled. Near the coffee station, a spectator muttered, "That's the Apex janitor, right? The one from a viral video." Another sipped his latte, smirking. "She's got a sponsor. No way she's this good without help." Lena kept walking, her jaw tight. She was used to being erased, but now they were rewriting her, turning her truth into a conspiracy. She didn't care. The board was her language, and she spoke it fluently. Ethan watched from a distance, his own matches a blur. He won 2, drew 1, lost to a Latvian expat with a brutal endgame. He didn't care about the scoreboard. He was here for Lena, for the promise he'd made, to clap like a stranger when she won. But the tournament was a gauntlet, and the semifinals loomed like a storm. Lena's next opponent was a shock, a gut punch from her past. Marcus Tate, a tall, lean man with a tailored suit and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. She knew him instantly, her rival from the Vine City chess circuits, the one who'd mocked her when she quit at 16, saying, "Girls like you don't last." Now he was a regional champion, his name on plaques across the South. Tate leaned across the board, his voice low, venomous. "Still mopping floors, Lena? Thought you'd stay gone." The crowd didn't hear, but Lena felt the words like a slap. She didn't respond, just set her pieces with a precision that made her hands tremble. Tate opened with the King's Indian, aggressive, taunting, his pieces lunging like wolves. Lena chose a quiet defense, her pawns forming a wall, her knights waiting in the shadows. The room faded, Jamal's cheers, the clock's tick, the crowd's hum. It was just her and the board, her and the past. Tate played dirty, not just on the board. He tapped his pen, coughed loudly, whispered, "You're out of your league, janitor." Lena's eyes stayed locked on the board. At move 14, she sacrificed a bishop, a reckless move that made Tate grin. He took the bait, pushing his queen forward, thinking he'd won. Lena's knight slid into place, forking his king and rook. The crowd gasped. Tate's grin vanished. By move 25, his position was a wreck, his king cornered. "Checkmate," Lena said, her voice steady as stone. Tate tipped his king, his face a mask of fury. He didn't shake her hand. The crowd erupted, their applause a roar that shook the ballroom. Lena didn't smile, She signed her score sheet and walked to the lobby, needing air. Ethan found her there, leaning against a pillar, her hands shaking. "You were a force out there," he said, his voice soft. She didn't look at him. "I wasn't playing for you." He nodded, unfazed. "I know, but Jamal saw it. That's what matters." She glanced up, her eyes softening for a moment, then hardening again. "They're still talking, saying I'm your project." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Let them talk. You're rewriting the story." The final round came too fast. Lena faced a former state champion, a pale man in a three-piece suit who moved like a machine. The ballroom was packed, cameras flashing, reporters hovering. Lena played black, her moves a song, deliberate, fierce, alive. She sacrificed early, drawing him into a trap he couldn't see. At move 43, his king fell. The crowd roared, Jamal leaping from his seat, his fists in the air. Ethan stood, clapping louder than anyone, his promise kept, like a stranger, but with a grin that said he'd never forget. Lena took the crystal trophy, its weight heavy in her hands. Reporters swarmed, but she slipped away, finding Jamal in the crowd. He hugged her, tears in his eyes. "You did it, Lena." She nodded, her throat tight. She'd won, not just a tournament, but something deeper, a piece of herself she'd buried long ago. The scandal, the whispers, Apex, they didn't matter. The board had spoken, and Lena Carter was no one's pawn. The Atlanta night was alive, its skyline a mosaic of light against the humid dark. Lena Carter stood on a pedestrian bridge over Freedom Park, the city's pulse humming below. Her navy blouse was wrinkled from the tournament, her crystal trophy left behind at the Marriott, a glittering afterthought. She didn't need it. The weight of her win, of who she'd become, was enough. Jamal walked beside her, his sneakers scuffing the pavement, his grin wide as the Chattahoochee. "You're a legend, Lena," he said, his voice thick with pride. She ruffled his hair, her smile faint but real. "Legends don't mop floors, kid. They build something." And she would. Back in Vine City, Lena founded the Vine City Nights, a chess club for kids who'd never seen a board outside a phone screen. She rented a room at the community center, its walls cracked but warm, its tables wobbly but sturdy. Every Saturday, she taught, Jamal at her side, his pawn pushes sharper each week. The kids came, shy at first, then bold, their laughter louder than the street noise outside. Lena didn't talk about Apex, didn't mention the scandal. She let her moves speak, each lesson a step toward a world where they wouldn't be invisible. Ethan Caldwell kept his distance, his promise to stay out of her story unbroken. He donated to the club anonymously, boards, clocks, snacks, delivered without fanfare. At Apex, he was quieter, his boardroom bravado softened. Lena's games had rewired him, shown him what privilege blinded him to. He didn't need to tell her. She knew. This isn't just a story about chess. It's about you. Lena Carter didn't win because she was lucky. She won because she believed in her worth when the world said she had none. So, take a lesson from her. First, trust your spark. Whatever makes you you, no matter who tries to dim it. Second, fight with action, not words. Let your work silence the noise. Third, lift others up. Lena built a club, not a crown. You can build something too. A kind word, a small push, a moment that changes someone's path. If Lena's story hit you, even a little, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below where you're watching from and what's your spark. Your story might light a fire for someone else. Lena didn't play for glory. She played so kids like Jamal, like her, could see they're more than their scars. Now it's your move. What's next?